welcome to week 3. A couple of things just to cover some groundwork with you. The commentary that you're going to need for the book of Joel to do your exegetical outline and observation on Joel has been posted for you in this week, so you should be able to find that commentary as well. There just is not as much material on Joel as there is on Hosea. Now, that's for two reasons. One, Joel is just not as studied as Hosea is. And also, I wrote my dissertation on Hosea, so I have every commentary I think that there is on Hosea, and that's not true with Joel. So there was just quite a bit more information on Hosea than Joel. So I do have a couple of things up there for you, and that should be quite enough to get you going on your exegetical outlines and observations. So today, you have everything that you need for your critical research paper, E001, E002, and both your study guides for quizzes 1 and 2 should be posted by the time you watch this video in week 3. So we should be really good to go for the semester. So let's pick back up with where we left off on Hosea last week. And let's look at the historical setting of Hosea. The superscription, chapter 1, verse 1 of Hosea, indicates that Hosea began his ministry during the last years of the reign of Jeroboam II. Now, Jeroboam II, the last years of his reign is going to be from approximately 786 to 746. He was a member of the Jehu dynasty. It was a time of stable government and economic prosperity, very similar to what we find in the book of Amos, because Amos and Hosea are probably contemporaries of each other, with Amos being on the scene prophesying first, and then Hosea coming after him, and there being some overlap between the two. So it was Israel society was sharply divided between the very prosperous and affluent and the desperately poor. There was corruption in the law court as well as in the worship system of the cult of Israel, and there was a general breakdown of public morality. Hosea's words in verses 1 through 4 reflect a thoroughgoing syncretism with Baalistic fertility religion and a loss of all covenant responsibility toward Yahweh. And that was chapters 1 through 4 and not verses 1 through 4. You find this really pronounced in chapter 4, verses 1 through 10. Let's just read that. I never mind taking time to read scripture. Find the book of Hosea here. Amos. Hosea. There we go. Hosea chapter 4, verses 1 through 10, and I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. Listen to the word of the Lord, O sons of Israel. See, there's that term of covenant relationship and intimacy and relationship, O sons of Israel. For the Lord has a case against the inhabitants of the land, because there is no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land. There is swearing, deception, murder, stealing, and adultery. They employ violence so that bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns, and everyone who lives in it languishes, along with the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky, and also the fish of the sea disappear. Yet let no one find fault, and let none offer reproof. For your people are like those who contend with the priest. So you will stumble by day, and the prophet also will stumble with you by night. And I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I will also reject you from being my priest. The indication here in verse 6, it's not just that the people are without knowledge, but that the very source of religious spiritual knowledge, the priest, is without knowledge. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. The more they multiplied, the more they sinned against me. I will change their glory into shame. They feed on the sin of my people and direct their desire toward their iniquity, and it will be like the people, like the priest. So I will punish them for their ways and repay them for their deeds, and they will eat but not have enough. They will play the harlot but not increase, because they have stopped giving heed to the Lord. So there you can see that the syncretism has thoroughly mixed itself in with the worship of Israel. The chapters that follow, chapter 5 to the end of the book, they mirror in rough chronological order the dissolution of the political life of the nation, which was shot through with intrigue and anarchy. Jeroboam's son Zechariah ruled only 6 months before he was assassinated by the usurper Shallum, who was in turn murdered 1 month later by Menachem, and we find that happened in 745 to 736 BC. At the same time, the great leader of the Assyrians, Tiglath-Pileser III, ascended to his throne, and Tiglath-Pileser's whole bent and goal was to conquer the world, and he pretty much did just that. But he ascended to the throne and led his armies in an invasion of the small states of the west. In order to survive, Menachem was forced to pay a large tribute. Menachem's son Pekahiah ruled for only 2 years before the anti-Assyrian party led by Pekah ben Remaliah assassinated him and put Pekah on the throne. In 735, Pekah attempted to put together a Syro-Ephraimitic alliance that would turn back Assyrian aggression, and he hoped to enlist Ahaz of Judah in his plan. When Ahaz refused, Ahaz was attacked by the armies of Syria and Israel, and that's the Syro-Ephraimitic War that's described in Hosea chapter 5, verses 8 through 15. Ahaz summoned Assyria to his aid, and the result was that Assyria subjugated Israel in 733 BC, reduced its land holdings to the capital city of Samaria and the hill country, and deported the large portion of its population. The remnant of the country was saved only by Hoshea ben Elah's assassination of Pekah and then submitting as a vassal to Assyria. Some portions of Hosea chapters 9 through 12 reflect the relatively peaceful time under the rule of Assyria before Shalmaneser V took the throne of the empire. However, the small states of the ancient Near Eastern world vacillated constantly between alliance to one or another empire of Mesopotamia and of Egypt, and Israel was never an exception to this. She always thought that if she could just manage to have the right political alliance, the right military alliance, then she would be able to defeat Assyria and have her freedom once again, and it just never happened because she was trusting in political alliances and not trusting in the Lord. Hosea 11:5 and 12:1 probably reflect the fact that when Shalmaneser took the throne, King Hoshea sent a mission to Egypt in the hope that the Pharaoh would support him in a rebellion against Assyria. As a result, Shalmaneser invaded Palestine in 734. He imprisoned Hoshea and laid siege to Samaria, which then fell to his successor Sargon II between 721 and 705 BC. We typically look at 722 BC as being the end of the northern kingdom, and that's exactly why. So the book of Hosea literally predicted and extended up to the complete destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel. In 721, Israel's remaining population was deported and replaced with aliens, and the 10 northern tribes of Israel completely disappeared from history. Hosea does not record the final fall, but one of the later texts, chapter 13, verse 6, does reflect Samaria's siege. Now, one of the things that the Assyrians did, part of their battle tactic, I call the Assyrians the Klingons of the ancient world. They were very militaristic, very much born and impassioned for war and for battle. And their attitude was, today is a good day to die if I get to die in battle. So what they would do is they would go in to conquer a nation. They would take the religious leadership, the spiritual leadership, the political leadership, the business leadership, all the people that were the shakers and movers spiritually, politically, and economically, and militarily, and they would impale them to the city wall. And impale means that they would kill them, run them through with a spear, and leave their bodies literally dangling up on the city wall, having been pierced with a spear. This was a method of intimidation, and they would intimidate all the people that they were conquering with the attitude or idea that if you try to rebel against us, this is what's going to happen to you. Then the people that remained, they would force them to intermarry with other nations, so that in just one generation they would have broken down all sense of national allegiance. The Israelites would have been married with the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, so on and so forth, so that within just one generation they didn't know who they were. So they had national allegiance to no one, and so they basically considered Assyria to be their place of identity. So that was their tactic, or the tactic of the Assyrians. In part 1, chapters 1 through 3 of Hosea, you have the title of the book, you have Hosea's marriage to Gomer, the instructions of God and the responses of Hosea, the birth of Jezreel, the birth of Lo-Ami, and then there's from 1:10 to 2:1, there's this flash of hope. Then in verses 2 through 13 of chapter 2, you have the tragedy of infidelity. And I'm going to skip on through the outline because you've got that on the PowerPoint and you'll be able to read that for yourself. And I want to make our best use of the time that we have together. Let's see. Here we go. The date of Hosea's ministry. And this is PowerPoint slide number 46 from last week. Some commentators believe that Hosea preached from 750 to 735 BC. Most, however, feel that his ministry started around 750 and then ended between 723 and 722. The following historical allusions in the book seem to take his ministry all the way down to 722. And these are things that you need to know for the quiz. Jeroboam II, and these are the internal markers in the book of Hosea that allow us to date his ministry from around 720 all the way down to about 722, which would be the destruction of the northern kingdom. Jeroboam II reigned from 786 to 746. His reign as Israel's king was one of peace, stability, and economic prosperity. This is in Hosea 1, 2, and 4. They reflect the last years of Jeroboam's reign. Jeroboam's son Zechariah, 746 to 745, was murdered by Shallum, who in turn was murdered by Menachem. Hosea 7:7 and 8:4 reflect that kind of political confusion. The Syro-Ephraimitic War was fought from 735 to 732, and that Syro-Ephraimitic coalition and war is reflected in Hosea 5 verses 8 through 11. Israel's last king was Hoshea, and the events of his reign are reflected in Hosea chapters 9 through 12, and that takes us down to 722 BC and the destruction of the northern kingdom. Shalmaneser V succeeded Tiglath-Pileser on Assyria's throne around 727 BC. When he did, King Hoshea of Israel withheld tribute to Assyria. Hosea chapters 13 and 14 reflect the disastrous consequences of Hoshea's rebellion. Shalmaneser V carried Hoshea away captive in 724, and Hosea 13:10 seems to reflect the aftermath of that event. The city of Samaria fell to Assyria in 722 BC, and Hosea 13:16 seems to anticipate that the fall of Samaria is imminent. These historical allusions take us right up to the last days of Samaria, but do not record the actual fall. This may imply that Hosea was able to escape, or that some disciple of Judah was able to get the writings of Hosea and get them to Judah where they were preserved. So let me look at this really quick. Let's move on to the first slide for tonight's PowerPoint presentation, chapters 1 through 4 of Hosea. I'm going to stop and go ahead and start up another one, and that way we can kind of have some sort of consistency here. So I'll be right back.